Yeah, so Netflix reported their Q4 and full year earnings, and investors in the market was generally very happy with the results, kind of beating general expectations. I think the stock was up about 10%. Let's see what they did. In Q4, they did $8.8 billion in revenue, which was up 12.5% year over year, which is I think the first time they've been back at double digit growth for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 quarters, where they kind of had that quite dramatic slowdown in subscriber growth. They even had a quarter of subscriber declines, and they've been kind of doing a bunch of things to kind of build up their revenue growth back into double digits. So that was good to see. Netflix's revenue is pretty simple. Kind of growth comes from two places: increases in subscribers and increases in how much each of those subscribers are paying. Sub additions in the quarter was 13.12 million, which was up 12.8% year over year. So an enormous quarter in terms of subscriber growth.
Yeah.
Again, it was I think last year in the same quarter they did maybe 7 or 8 million, and even that was one of their best quarters ever. I don't think
Where are
this
these
is.
subscribers coming from?
Well, it's a good question. So in terms of drivers, they kind of gave a couple of reasons why this has kind of continued. Continued benefits from account sharing crackdowns. So they've kind of still been rolling out, limiting people from sharing between households, and a lot of people are, of course, using that opportunity to sign up for their own account. In terms of their average revenue per member, it came in at $11.31 per month, which is just a 1% increase year over year. They did some price increases and some price decreases. They did price increases in the US, the UK, and France, and they did price decreases in some countries where there's a little bit more price sensitivity to drive growth. It's been pretty clear, I think, so far that there's been absolutely zero pushback on price increases or even the password crackdown, which has been obviously very good for the business. They, of course, also rolled out the ad-supported tier, which I'll talk about in a little bit. In terms of
it's interesting. I feel like people on the password crackdown, people have kicked up a stink, being like, "Oh, that's annoying." But in terms of actual business metrics, it hasn't had much of an impact. It's helped Netflix. It hasn't lost. No one's been like, "Oh, I'm going to give up Netflix now because they're cracking down on the password sharing."
Yeah, like if you believed like all the social media comments during that time, or even when they do price increases, everyone is like, "It's just so expensive, I'm canceling." And I posted on Twitter yesterday. I think maybe some of those people lied because it doesn't look like people are canceling, which is obviously I think maybe a good testament to prove that people enjoy the content on the platform, even if they have to pay a little bit more. Obviously, from a consumer perspective, sure, it sucks that you have to pay a little bit more, but from a business perspective, I think it kind of proves that they've got the content that people want to watch, which is obviously good. For the full year, revenue came in at $33.7 billion, which was up 6.6% year over year. So for the full year, if you're including some of their slower quarters, growth was still kind of in the mid-single digits. Operating margin was 21% versus 18% last year. So pretty consistently, they've just continued to benefit from scale economics. So they've got revenue and revenue per customer growing faster than their content spend and their content spend per customer. And historically, that's kind of added 1 to 2% to their margins every single year. So it's kind of just been progressively going up in a pretty linear fashion, excluding COVID. And next year, it's kind of no different. They're expecting a 24% operating margin. So another kind of a 3% increase to their margin as they continue to kind of benefit from operating at a larger scale. Operating profit came in at about $7 billion, which was a 23.5% year over year increase. And that's where you can see that, benefits,
Nice.
companies that benefit from the scale economics, even though, top line only grows at 6.5%, operating profit grows at over 20% because of that increased efficiency. So that's obviously a good thing for their business. Earnings per share came in at $12.03, which was up 20.9% year over year.
Yeah, cool. That's looking pretty nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was a generally very good year for the business. One of the things I actually really like about Netflix's management team is their press releases have just these long descriptions of what they see going on in the business. Often you don't get that from companies where you get these kind of big kind of outlooks and perspectives on things that are going on. And they spoke about this in the latest quarter. They're planning on ramping their content spend back up to 17 billion, which is what it was before last year. Last year, in 2023, content spend dropped to 12 billion, so they pulled it back quite significantly, and that was really for two reasons. One was they just wanted to wait to see revenue growth reaccelerate before excessively spending on content, and then the writers and actors strikes played a role as well in that as well, in terms of them having to limit their production for a considerable portion of the year. But they're looking forward to reaccelerating their content spend next year. They spoke about competition. They're expecting further consolidation from the declining legacy media businesses. So there's obviously been an enormous amount of consolidation, mergers, acquisitions from different media companies over the last decade. And they think that will continue, but they don't think that any mergers or acquisitions will change the competitive landscape, which is a really nice way of them saying they don't think it's really going to help any of these media companies in their in their situation, or at least that's kind of their view.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they also spoke about what are they focusing on going into 2024. They want to continue scaling advertising revenue, which they said is still a very, very small part of their business. They have 23 million subscribers on that ad plan, which is a small amount, but they also haven't had that plan for all that long. So it's that's an interesting figure for them to release.
And it's the plan is you still have to pay per month. It's not like completely free, just ad supported. It's like ad supported, but it just makes it cheaper, right?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, they'll be collecting revenue ultimately when they scale and ramp that up. It'll be like a mix of subscribers paying a little bit and then receiving some ad revenue. And their initial numbers seem to think that it will actually do better than just having a basic cheap plan that is ad free, even at a higher price. And they're actually starting to remove their lower plans to kind of push people in one direction, which is pay a premium, you get high quality, more screens, or if you want to be at the low end, you're going to get ads and they'll be able to generate revenue from the ads. So it seems like they're kind of heading in that direction. They're also testing a bunch of new content verticals. So they're pushing more into live content and sports. They just signed a 10-year deal with the WWE for $5 billion. So starting in 2025, WWE's Raw will be streaming live on Monday nights year-round for a decade. So they secured the rights to that. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, if you look at kind of where people spend their time watching television, most of the viewing time is still on live programming. And a lot of that is things that Netflix doesn't do, which is news and sports. And, WWE is not really a sport, but it's kind of a step in that direction. It's kind of a mix of a sport and entertainment. So they're kind of starting to, test the waters, around what they're doing there.
It's interesting to see the streaming services start pushing into sport. I find that very interesting. It's just something, there's no reason why it can't happen, but it's something that I find, it just feels odd to me. Like I saw that Amazon, they snapped up the rights to the Cricket World Cups until 2027 in Australia. So like that's just going to be so weird to have some of the World Cup being, I don't know. I just find it so strange to think like these places where we get dramas and TV shows and now it's like sports as well. I don't know. It's just odd.
And Netflix hasn't wanted to go into sports because the sports rights have notoriously been extremely competitive, very expensive, and it's not really a good business, but it's kind of like, you can kind of think of it in the same respect as like a grocery store having milk. Like milk is a loss leader for grocery stores. They put it at the back of the store. If you buy just milk, you've made a loss for that grocery store, but they have to have milk because if you don't, why would anyone shop there? And it's kind of the same thing. It's like if you have sports, it's probably not going to make you a ton of money, but people then might subscribe to your service and watch your other content. So I think given how much time people spend on things like news and sports, it's just a natural progression for Netflix to try and grab more of a larger percentage of people's viewing time. So it kind of makes sense.
I think WWE kind of makes sense. Exactly what you're saying. It's like not exactly sport. It's still more on the drama.
Yeah,
which is kind of up Netflix's alley. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a nice like stepping stone. It is live, which they haven't done a whole lot of live content, so that's like a step. And it is, some people consider it a sport. Obviously, it's scripted, but it is like a half step to like having like I don't know, boxing or cricket or something like that. And then the only other thing I wanted to say on Netflix was they recently started doing a massive data dump on their engagement data. So they now do biannually releases of all of the data on their shows. And basically they're hoping that other media companies will follow for transparency, not just from an investor perspective, but to help ensure that the people working on films, actors, writers can see that they're getting fairly compensated, because there's not much clarity at the moment on how shows are doing on streaming services. So it's hard for them to know, am I getting paid right? Am I getting the right royalties? Does this make sense? Whereas it has been a lot clearer in the past with traditional media to kind of see those things. So they've been releasing their half-yearly data. The first half of 2023, Netflix had 100 billion watch hours across their 18,000 shows, which is kind of a pretty interesting stat. And I'd love to see how that compares to Disney Plus and Max and Paramount. And
I would too. Do you ever think we're gonna get that?
Nope.
Though, Hamish? Nope.
No,
I don't think so.
unfortunately.
I love it that Netflix is like, yeah, we'll show you the data.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Yeah.
I don't know why these other platforms aren't like, come on, get on there. We show it, and I don't know, they should show it too.
Yeah. Maybe one day.
Sign that you're the number one.
Yeah. And then in terms of the US, they had the number one original series, original film, and acquired series almost every week in 2023, which is obviously a nice little achievement as well. So
wow.
So yeah,
that's pretty good.
It's been a good year, I think, for Netflix. Yeah,
that is quite a good year. Yeah, crazy. Interesting, because it is one of those products that if you're tight on cash, you could just kind of give the flick.
Yeah.
It's not necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like like what you were saying before. You have to go to the grocery store, right? You have to buy milk. You don't have to buy Netflix, but people still are. So